Well, God laid it on my heart to do a study on Esther. I guess because the other day somebody asked me a question concerning Esther, and I could not remember the answer. And I thought, well, it's been a while since I've read in that book. It's been a while since I've studied in that book. And you know, reading and studying are two different things. You can read a chapter pretty fast and not know a word you said or read. But if you go a little slower and study it, you might glean a little bit of something out of it that you can remember and that would be good for you to know. And you might notice something that you never noticed the last time you read it. So I thought, if I can't remember the answers to these questions, I need to review Esther. So whether you need it, hopefully you do. I know I do. I know I do. I need reminded. So it sometimes that old way of learning, the repeat and repeat and repeat till you get it, works. And I haven't repeated enough from Esther to know the answers to the questions that were asked me, and they were simple questions. They weren't anything complicated. So I want to give you a little bit of background. We're going to go, you might need some time to find Esther. Maybe you know where it's at, but it's the book between Nehemiah and I believe it's Job. Yeah, it's a little book. It's not very, well, it's bigger than some. How many chapters is in there? It's got 10 chapters, and I would like to go over all 10 of them, but it won't happen tonight. So we'll just aim for chapter 1 and go from there. Esther is easy to apply to our lives. She's just, she wasn't, God loves to pick ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And he likes to pick somebody that he knows he can get them to obey him, even when it's hard and difficult. And so he can take a nobody and make a somebody out of them. And he can take somebody who doesn't think they're worthy and make a difference for many. And that's what he did with Esther. There's a song that is out there that is popular or has been popular in the past about it only takes one can make a difference, I think is what it's called. But it talks about, one vote can make a difference if you're talking about politics. One man can make a difference when you're talking about Jesus. He was one man, but what he did made a difference for everybody. And anyway, it lists a whole bunch of things that you can do and make a difference, or that happens in the world, and it only took one to make a difference. And so in this case, Esther is the one that made a difference. She was only one person, but she did what God told her to do, and she had victory. The victory is sure when you do it God's way, when you follow his plan. He called and he chose Esther to bring a deliverance of the Jews. They were in bondage in another country, and there was a time period where there were those out there wanting to destroy them. And we've had people, well, it's just like there's people today that are trying their best to do what's right, but there's a group of people that comes against them and tries to destroy them. And we've witnessed it a lot in the last few years. In the political scene especially, because they usually make the news and we hear about them more than we do the common person normally. But some of those that are in the news were common people. It's like we have a man who had a business here in town, and he's now in the government. And there's been a lot of people that's had a small beginning, but now is in a place where they can maybe make a bigger difference than what they used to be. There's a couple of things I want you to keep in mind. She did what she was told to do to be prepared, and she was obedient. Now, Esther was an orphan. Her parents died at a young age, and her uncle Mordecai was in charge of her. And that's kind of where we start. I want to tell you, this was at the time of, he's sometimes called Xerxes and sometimes Ahasuerus, but he was the king of Persia, and he was over all the provinces, which were more than 127 provinces that ran from India to Ethiopia. And so he was a very big king and influential, that word right. And anyway, he got it in his mind that he wanted to throw a great big celebration. And he was married to the queen of Persia, whose name was Vashti, or Vashti, I think. And anyway, when he was having his I don't see where I wrote down what I was wanting to tell you. Anyway, his celebration was so big, it lasted almost half a year. And he spent the first part of it showing off to his important leaders of various places that he invited to his celebration, showing off all of his land and his the 127 provinces. He was basically showing off all of his stuff, his riches, his glory, his everything. And when he celebrated in a big way. And even though she was celebrating with some ladies, he decided he wanted to show off his wife. And so he sent some men to get Vashti away from her party and come be part of his party long enough for him to show all the people that were there for his party his beautiful wife, and she flat out refused to come. Now, whether she was right or wrong as far as what she did in that day, because the way the culture was set up, it was a very big no-no for women not to obey their husbands. And it was even bigger of a no-no for somebody in authority or a high position like a queen to not obey the king. Because when they're in high authority like that, they set an example for all the people in the land. And by her deciding that she wasn't going to do what the king wanted her to do, it wasn't going to affect just her and the king. It was going to affect all the women and all the men in the part of the country that they were over. Because if the queen didn't obey her husband, that told all the other women in the land they didn't have to obey their husband. Didn't matter whether the husband's right or wrong, they didn't have to obey him. And so that would cause chaos and unrest in the families. So, even though his reason for calling the queen was not a proper one, it wasn't right that he was going to show her off, that he didn't have the right reason, but still, she was expected to obey him. And since she didn't, he chose to replace her. And it tells the Bible how that how that happened and everything, but I just kind of summarizing it. So Esther, she had to prepare to be good enough to where the king would find her beautiful and desirable enough to make her queen. And she was just an orphan, a little Jewish girl that was an orphan. Her parents had died, and her uncle was over her. which that scenario right there didn't fit into the requirements of a queen. She wasn't born of a royal family or anything like that, according to what they knew. And so this was, see, God took somebody that was a nobody, and let's read this story and find out what he did with this woman who started out as considered a nobody to the natural way of thinking into a somebody, a hero, if you would. All right, we're going to go to Esther chapter 1, and in this one we're just going to read a little bit about what I just summarized, and then in more depth, I guess, and then hopefully next Wednesday we'll undertake chapter 2, and so it'll probably be a 10-part series if I don't get directed by God to do it different. So we're going to, if you have found Esther in your Bibles, I'm going to have Josie read out of the Living Word and Dave out of the King James Version, and I'll read out of the Amplified Version. So just know there are 3 different versions we're going to read, and then discuss what we read and see what we can glean from these. And we're not debating whether one version is better than another. We're just trying to glean whatever we can out of them without going too deep into the original Greek or the original Hebrew on anything. So we're just trying to glean what we can out of what we see in front of us, okay? If you feel led to, you dive into it as deep as you want to. There's all kinds of Bible helps out there. There's Bible dictionaries. There's all kinds of books have been written by about Esther and Queen Anne, about her uncle Mordecai, and about this King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, however way you want to call him. I think one word's Hebrew and the other one's Greek. Name for him, something like that. But anyway, we're going to start out with verses 1 through 5. Who wants to start? You want to start, Josie? I think she's there already. Dave, I think, is too, by the way. But anyway, verses 1 through 5, please.
It was the 3rd year of the reign of King Ahasuerus, emperor of vast Media Persia, with its 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia. This was the year of the great celebration of Shishon Palace, to which the emperor invited all his governors, aides, and army officers, bringing them in from every part of Media Persia for the occasion. The celebration lasted 6 months, a tremendous display of the wealth and glory of his empire. When it was all over, the king gave a special party for the palace servants and officials, janitors, and cabinet officials alike for 7 days of revelry held in the courtyard of the palace garden.
Okay. Thank you. Dave?
What from verse 1 to what?
1 to 5.
Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus,
Close enough.
which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia over 127 provinces. That in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants. The power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace.
Thank you. It was in the days of Ahasuerus, Xerxes, and the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was in Shushan, the capital of the Persian Empire, in the palace or castle, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his princes and his courtiers, the chief officers of the Persian and Median army, and the nobles and governors of the provinces were there before him, while he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor and excellence of his majesty for the many days, even 180 days, which is a half a year in our way of thinking. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast for all the people present in Shushan, the capital, both great and small, a 7-day feast in the court of the garden of the king's palace. What comments do we have? Well, I want to remark about the feast itself was 7 days long. That's a pretty long feast. We might have a fellowship meeting, a church fellowship meeting that lasts that long, or a certain get together like that. But before that, it was half a year's worth of him showing off all the stuff he owned, everywhere, all the land and all the everything. He's showing all the dignitaries and whatever, anybody that meant anything to him, he was showing off all that stuff, and it took him half a year to do it. And I can't think of a single solitary thing we have studied for that long, or not studied, but celebrated that long. But maybe there is, but I don't remember it. And even their regular feasts, I don't remember any of their regular feasts ever lasting that long either. So anyway, that's what he wanted, and that's what he did.
I'm sure all those people didn't mind going to this big, huge celebration because they didn't have to do anything about...
They didn't have to work.
Yeah, they didn't have to work. They didn't have to buy food. They didn't have to do anything at home. It was a huge, long vacation.
Yeah. They were probably joyful over it, maybe not for the reasons he was, but I think you're right.
I mean, back then that's probably considered a paradise or heaven. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you think of today's standards.
Right. And it sounds like since he was rich enough to do that, the feast itself was going to be fancy. The decorations were going to be fancy. The provisions were going to be fancy. The food was going to be fancy. It was just rich everywhere. So he was in the show-off mode, and he was taking advantage of every bit of it. Okay, let's see what verses 6 through 8 say.
The decorations were green, white, and blue, fastened with purple ribbons, tied to silver rings, embedded in marble pillars. Gold and silver benches stood on pavements of black, red, white, and yellow marble. Drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine, for the king was feeling very generous. The only restriction on the drinking was that no one should be compelled to take more than he wanted, but those who wished could have as much as they pleased. For the king had instructed his officers to let everyone decide this matter for himself.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, Dave. Verses 6 through 8.
Where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure.
Okay, thank you. There were hangings of fine white cloth, of green and blue cotton, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings or rods and marble pillars. The couches of gold and silver rested on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, and I forgot to look that up, sorry, white marble, mother of pearl, and precious colored stones. Drinks were served in different kinds of golden goblets, and there was royal wine in abundance, according to the liberality of the king. And drinking was according to the law. No one was compelled to drink, for the king had directed all the officials of his palace to serve only as each guest desired. Comments?
Yeah, I can see why everybody came.
Yeah. Especially those that like to drink, they could have all they wanted, huh? But they weren't going to make people drink a bunch if they didn't want a bunch, so that was good. And it says the couches of gold and silver rested on a mosaic pavement, and it sounds to me like the flooring was lots of different stones, precious stones or whatever that it was made out of. I mean, that's what I'm envisioning. And couches, if I understand correctly, back then they reclined while they were eating on kind of like cushion-like things that they called couches. But I failed to look that up to refresh my memory. And that's based off my memory, so don't hold me to it. But anyway, it all speaks of luxury, of abundance, extreme abundance, beyond anybody's needs, far beyond anybody's needs, and far beyond a lot of people's wants. So he didn't spare anything. He was in a very generous and liberal mood. And he was going to share it all. But if you notice how when he's showing off, he's taking credit for all of it, which that's something that I want to bring out too. When God blesses us, that's awesome. And God does bless us from time to time, and sometimes he does more than blessing us with our needs met. He sometimes gives us more than enough to share with plenty of others. But we always need to recognize God was at the root of it all. God created it all. God made a way for us to have it all that we share, and we should not try to brag and take credit, and I mean, I don't see where it gives God credit for anything there. So I'm just saying that's an indication to me that something's going to happen that's going to change that. Because that's not a good thing. But anyway, any other comments? All right, let's move on to verses 10. No, I'm sorry, 9. I didn't write that down right. Verses 9 through 14.
Queen Vesta gave a party for the women of the palace at the same time. On the final day, when the king was feeling high, half drunk from wine, he told the 7 eunuchs, who were his personal aides, it's kind of hard to pronounce, Mahaman, Bejla, Hamona, Begta, Abakatha, Sidal, and Sargus, to bring Queen Vesta to him with a royal crown upon her head, so that all the men could gaze upon her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. But when they conveyed the emperor's order to Queen Vesta, she refused to come. The king was furious, but first consulted his lawyers, for that he did nothing without their advice. They were men of wisdom who knew the temper of the times as well as Persian law and justice, and the king trusted their judgment. These men were Karshana, Shalfa, Amatha, Tarsha, Mears, Messina, and Mimaka. I'm not saying it
I
right.
can't pronounce them either. You did
7
pretty good.
high officials. Let me turn the page. All right, turn. Of Media Persia, they were his personal friends as well as being the chief officers of the government. Should I read it? Now?
Yeah, to 14, and you did it. Okay. I think that was the end
There
of
was
14.
another deal on mine.
Oh, do
What
you?
shall we do about the situation, he asked them. What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders properly sent through his aides?
Okay. Huh. Yeah, it doesn't it's got that in mind, but it's like there's a verse in between, I believe, if I'm looking at it correctly. But anyway, that's okay. It'll get included however way it is in each person's version of it. All right, Dave, will you read verses 9 through 14 for me, please?
Also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7th chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with crown royal, to show the people and princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Mears, Mersena, and Mumakan, the 7th prince of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, in which sat the first in the kingdom.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments about any of the verses we've read so far?
Interesting names.
The names are hard, and I used to have a Bible that helped me pronounce the names, but I don't have that Bible anymore. And most of the Bibles don't show you any clues as to how to pronounce these, so you'd have to dig into it. And personally, at least maybe there's a meaning behind all these names that we need to consider, but I'm not wanting to take time to find out, so that's on me. But if you want to dig into those names and find out if there's any meanings to them that would be beneficial to know, I would like to know what you find out.
And Queen Vashti, she wasn't going to be ordered around.
Right.
You know,
Well,
like
not only that, but she was probably disgusted at her husband's behavior because he was drunk.
well, being displayed by
Being displayed
to all
like
the
that.
people, like a
Yeah.
object or something.
Yeah, like a diamond ring or something. Yeah, she was insulted by what he was doing, so she didn't care whether she was supposed to obey her husband or not. She decided not to.
Back then, she didn't want to be a trophy wife.
Right. So we can understand her reasoning. But anyway, okay. Are there any other comments about these? Oh, and she might have been insulted because he didn't come and ask her personally either. He sent his eunuchs or his guys. And you know what? I don't think I read it from the Amplified either, so I need to do that to be fair. But I get excited about explaining what I'm getting on, and I forget to do my reading. All right, verse 9 through 14 in the Amplified said, and also Queen Vashti gave, or some say Vashti, I don't know which is right, gave a banquet for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Now, I don't see anything that gives us a clue that she's trying to show off anything. She's just holding a party. Now, I could be wrong, but it's not making a big, it doesn't look like she's, other than having the get-together and inviting women to it, it doesn't sound like she's got the same frame of mind that the king does about what he's doing. On the seventh day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, I'm not pronouncing these right either, but Horbana, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zephyr, Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who ministered to King Ahasuerus as attendants, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, to show so he didn't want her to just come by herself. He wanted her to fully adorned, to look really fancy, so that he could kind of flaunt her around and hopefully make all the guys there jealous that he had such a beautiful woman for his wife. So he's not talking about whether she's beautiful inside. He's all about the outside right now. And it says, for she was fair to behold. So she was pleasant to look on. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. Therefore the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king spoke to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure towards all who were familiar with law and judgment. You notice he didn't go to God. I don't know whether he believed in God or not, but he didn't go to God. He went to these other men that were supposed to know the right and wrong of the land. Those next to him being Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Maris, Marcina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media who were in the king's presence and held first place in the kingdom. So his most important dignitaries that were a part of his group, I guess. Anyway, it's kind of an example of how a husband's not supposed to be. A woman should heed her husband's advice if her husband is a godly man, especially. But if he's not a godly man, there are some things that he might command her to do that would not be good to do. So anyway, but it's not bringing that out. It's bringing out the fact that the king had rules of the land that he expected her to abide by, and it didn't matter whether he was right or wrong in what he was doing or his attitude with what he is doing. he expected her to obey him. And there were consequences for not obeying the king. And if you didn't obey the king, some of the consequences, depending on the offense, the king could choose to take your life if you didn't obey him. So, if you study their culture at that time and stuff, that's kind of brought out in studying the culture. So that would be an interesting study if you're looking for something to study about. All right. There was a lot of comments that you guys already made. And does anybody have any more to add to those? It's not. Okay, let's move on to verses 15 through 18.
What shall we do about the situation, he asked, and what penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders properly sent through his aides? Memucan answered for the others, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but every official and citizen of your empire. For women everywhere will begin to disobey their husbands when they learn what Queen Vashti has done. And before this day is out, the wife of every one of us officials throughout your empire will hear what the queen did and will start talking to us husbands the same way, and there will be contempt and anger throughout your realm. Now, where at? Which?
You just read it all.
Okay.
Through 18.
Okay.
You did good. Okay, Dave, verses 15 through 18, please.
What shall we do unto the king Vashti according to law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? And Memucan answered before the king of the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes, and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen. Thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. If it please the king...
No, that's good. You went to 18, so that's great. Not you. All right, the Amplified says, he said, according to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not done the bidding of King Ahasuerus, conveyed by the eunuchs. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti, the queen, has not only done wrong to the king, but also to all the princes and to all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will become known to all women, making their husbands contemptible in their eyes, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she did not come. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will be telling it to all the king's princes. So contempt and wrath in plenty will arise. Any comments? Well, with the queen being married to the king, of course, she sets example for the men, just like the king sets example she sets example for the females, and the king sets the examples for the males. And so if the king does it, then every guy thinks it's okay. And if the queen does it, every woman thinks it's okay. So that's what they're talking about. And I can see their point of view quite readily. It's kind of like, well, for a church, for instance, if you've got one leader saying one thing and another leader saying something totally different or totally opposite, it causes confusion within the membership. And sometimes it causes contention and rebellion amongst the membership. So the leaders need to be in agreement on these kind of things and work together to be on this. I call it being on the same page. They shouldn't be working against one another. If they're in leadership, they need to sit down and have a meeting, figure out how they're going to do it, and they all agree to do it, and that's how they do it. Because it's not gonna be balanced, and it's not gonna be in one accord any other way. And it matters not if the leader that's ahead of them all is drunk or not. They all need to be of one accord on the decisions on how they're handling different situations. And so, it does matter that they're drunk. They shouldn't be drunk. But I'm saying if they're doing something wrong, it doesn't excuse everybody else to do something else wrong. That's the point I was really trying to make. I didn't word it too well. Anyway, that's my comment on that. Any other comments? All right. Let's go to verse 19 through 22. And that's the end of that chapter. So we're going to go 19 to the end of the chapter.
We suggest that, subject to your agreement, you issue a royal indict, a law of the Medes and Persians that can never be changed, that Queen Vashti be forever banished from your presence, and that you choose another queen more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout your great kingdom, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will be respected by their wives. The king in all his age thought this made good sense, so he followed Mamlekah's counsel and sent letters to all of his provinces in all the local languages, stressing that every man should rule his home and should assert his authority.
Thank you. Dave? 19 through the end.
If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people.
Thank you. If it pleases the king, let a royal command go forth from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and Medes, so that it may not be changed, that Vashti is to be divorced and come no more before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the king's decree is made and proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, extensive as it is, all wives will give honor to their husbands, high and low. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did what Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to each in its own script, and to every people in their own language, saying that every man should rule his own house and speak there in the language of his own people. If he had foreign wives, let them learn his language. So he's supposed to be the head of his house, which made sense. But at least they let her keep her life, but all that was hers, she lost her inheritance, I guess, basically, because she would have inherited a lot being the king's wife, but since she lost her position, she lost her inheritance, is what I get out of all that. So, but it's true that if biblically speaking, the Bible tells the husbands to love their wives and tells the wives to obey their husbands. Well, they're more likely to obey the husband if he really loves them in a way to where what he rules over her with, he rules out of love, not not in a tyrant manner. So anyway, it's more of a leadership thing more than it is crack the whip and make her do what you want her to do type thing. But when you're leading, you're showing an example of how to lead, and that was good advice that they gave the king, because in his leading, if he let her get away with that, there would have been a big problem in every household. So, and it would have been his fault because he led incorrectly. So you can see the good and the bad in several different things. But anyway, God is preparing a way here for a solution that will bring him glory and honor to God, because God's the creator and he deserves the glory and the honor. So anyway, we'll see how it all turns out. And hopefully next week we'll get to cover chapter 2 of Esther to find out what happens next and how she ended up to be in line with many qualified women, and how he had many that he got to choose from, and how they had to prepare themselves to go before the king before they were allowed to go before him. And I can't remember if it took a whole year for this preparation. I don't remember if it says in Esther, but there's somewhere in the Bible it sounded like when they were doing the preparation for something like this where a king was going to choose one, that it took a whole year of preparation. So we hopefully will find the answer to my question as we study the rest of the chapters. So anyway, any further comments from anybody?